Hey, I'm Craig.
I'm Cole.
Hi. Have you ever had a pair of headphones that quit working because of a bad connection? Or have you ever considered mending a damaged wire? Or are you just simply interested in how to solder? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, then you will probably benefit from the following instructional demonstration. I'm going to demonstrate some basic solder techniques. Through the course of the demonstration, I will be providing you with some safety tips. I will cover some of the basic pieces of equipment that are required, and finally, I will demonstrate how to solder two wires together. By the end of the presentation, you should have at least a better understanding of the solder process. So before I get started with the actual soldering, I'll go over some safety points. Heat is fundamental to soldering, and therefore the most immediate dangers while soldering are burns. According to the material safety data sheet for standard lead solder, the melting point is around 108 degrees Celsius. And aside from burns, there are also some chemical hazards that are associated with soldering. When solder is melted, it can produce fumes that contain materials that are hazardous when inhaled. The most important piece of safety equipment while soldering is a pair of safety glasses. The melting process can sometimes be violent, and it can send small beads of molten solder in random directions. So it goes without saying that you don't want molten metal hitting you in the eyes. The fumes that are emitted when melting solder are also a safety issue. And according to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA website, lead-based solder can heat, and lead oxide fumes are released into the air. Excess exposure to lead oxide can result in lead poisoning. For this reason, when soldering, you should try to work in a well-ventilated area and try not to inhale the fumes. So now that we've gone over some of the safety issues associated with soldering, let's take a look at some of the equipment I have here. To solder effectively, the basic materials that you'll want to have are a soldering iron and a holster. You'll also want to have some solder, preferably a rosin core lead solder, and a wet sponge. Soldering irons come in a variety of different makes and models and over a wide price range. The truth is, unless you'll be soldering on a regular basis, a cheap soldering will suffice. This iron that I have is very cheap and basic and inexpensive, and I simply plug it in, it begins to heat up. There's no switch or anything, and I'll keep it in the holster to keep it from burning anything else. There are also several types of solder available. It comes in a wide variety of diameters, and it can be either leaded or lead-free, and it can also have a rosin core. The rosin is basically a sap-like acid that cleans up the metal surfaces that are being soldered. This makes for a better solder joint because it removes all the impurities on the metal surfaces. I also like to use a wet sponge, and this is also just to clean the tip of excess solder. A clean solder iron tip is essential to a good solder joint. So far we've covered safety and equipment, and now it's time to actually do the soldering. So basically, to begin, these are the two wires that I plan to solder together. So imagine this is a damaged wire. So I'll start by just twisting the two wires together, like so. And then there's a basic process to go through in soldering, and this process is as follows. First, you tin the tip, then you heat the joint to be soldered, then you apply the solder, you remove the solder source, then you remove the iron, and then you should be left with a nice clean solder joint. So I will start by what is called tinning the tip, where I just apply solder directly to my iron tip, and you see it melts right on, and this will allow for a good flow of heat into the solder joint. So next I will touch the tip of the iron directly to the wires, and I'll actually apply the solder to the wires and not to the tip of the iron, and you see that is actually just drawn right into the solder joint. So then I'll remove the solder, remove the iron, and I am left with a nice, clean, strong solder joint. This concludes the process of soldering. I've gone over some safety features. I've also gone over some of the materials involved, and I've given you a basic guideline for the process to follow when soldering. So now don't be afraid to roll up your sleeves and try it yourself. Thank you.